Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Schreier.
And I'm Kirk Hamilton.
And this is Split Screen, episode 3. Kirk, how are you doing today? I am freezing right now.
You're cold?
As you can see.
I am not cold. I am waking up a little bit. I've got my coffee here. We're shooting earlier than normal. But I'm not cold. I'm not cold, at least. I don't have to wear a jacket like you.
You don't? Well, it's like for some reason they decided that Kotaku's offices should be freezing. And to those of you who are just listening to this and not watching, I'm wearing a North Face fleece jacket inside the soundstage because it is really friggin' cold.
I feel like that's going to keep you guys on your toes. It's going to keep you nice and alert and awake and ready and hungry to break video game news all day.
Yeah, that's true. Kirk told me, or Steven, our boss, Steven Tortilla, the editor of Kotaku, told me that I should drink some beer before recording, but I feel like it's a little too early.
I know, it's too early for that. That's the problem. We should start shooting at night so that we can get in the proper mindset.
Yeah, so we can just drink. That's what Giant Bomb does. That's it. Yeah, we should really emulate them and just get drunk and
just
record.
Sit around and drink. I think that would be good. We'll do that sometime anyway.
So, Kirk, today we are going to talk about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is an interesting subject because it's both beloved and loathed by many people. Kirk, I guess we should start by talking about our own experiences with Kickstarter, because the general question is going to be, should you ever donate to Kickstarter? When should you donate to Kickstarter? Kirk, have you ever donated to a Kickstarter? Be a video game or something else?
I'm trying to think now. I think there have been a couple non-gaming ones that I've done. But I have donated to a couple of video game Kickstarters a while ago. I stopped doing it a long time ago. But I backed the Sports Friends Kickstarter, if you remember that. It was the Johann Sebastian Joust and those other games for PS4, which seemed like a cool project. And I was like, it was a long time ago. I don't remember when exactly, several years ago. And I thought, that sounds cool. And I backed it, and they did make their goal, and they did make the game. So I guess that was a positive experience. I felt like I helped them make that game anyway.
Yeah, well, that doesn't always happen. It feels like
right.
It's like a fraction of the time where the game actually gets delivered. So the Sports Friends, so did you play it? Did you enjoy it?
I played a little bit. I played Joust. I didn't actually play that much. I guess I lost interest. I don't know. I think those games are really cool. I think a lot of people play them. Maybe I don't have enough friends over to play video games, but there were a lot of local co-op games that I'm glad exist in the world and people can play them, but I don't have enough PlayStation Move controllers to have Johann Sebastian Joust parties at my apartment.
So is it fair to say that you donated to that not because you wanted it, but because you like the idea of it?
I liked the idea, yeah. And that was before. It was proto Kickstarter. I can't remember the exact timeline now. But I think that was before the Tim Schafer thing happened, or it was
before.
At least
you can separate
right
Kickstarter
at the exact same time. It was right around then, I think.
You have to separate Kickstarter into before Schafer and after Schafer.
You really do, right? Because I feel like that changed everything. I think that really the Broken Age Kickstarter changed everything.
Well, it does feel like after that. Yeah, well, so Broken Age, so Tim Schafer came out with this Kickstarter. He was basically the first ever high-profile game designer to make a Kickstarter. That was in early 2012. I believe it was February or March of 2012. And he raised, how much did he raise? $3 million? Something like that. Some crazy amount of money, maybe a little lower.
In the multiple
Something
millions.
like that. And it just suddenly dollar signs started appearing in every game designer's eyes, being like, wait a minute, if Tim Schafer can do this, we can do this too. And then there were some other high-profile ones around then. Oculus Rift was a big one, and Pillars of Eternity.
It was funny. It was definitely also a certain type of game developer, which I think we still see represented on Kickstarter, which is sort of like Tim Schafer, and at the time it was Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert, which is funny because Ron's not at Double Fine anymore, but it was this great adventure game reunion, right? And they were pitching this nostalgia thing, saying, look, we've been stuck making games that you didn't want, basically making Brutal Legend, and instead everybody
that's a little unfair.
Well, that's kind of I know, I liked Brutal Legend.
Some people like Brutal Legend.
No, right, but it was basically we've been making these console games. What we really would love to do is make another game Monkey Island or Maniac Mansion, and these games that you guys love. And that thing, I think, was so powerful. That's what made all the money for them, was that everybody said, yeah, I would love to play those games. So then we started seeing these this second tier of those kinds of developers. Oh, I made this game, you know, in the 90s that you really loved, and I've kind of not really been doing anything for the last 10 years, and now, hey, this is like a great way for you to make it, which is not, like, I think it's easy to look at that cynically, but I think that's not cynical, right? Like, it's cool that it gives an avenue for people who made things that we like to make new versions of those things sometimes.
Well, one of the big themes was publishers don't think that this can happen. Let's prove them wrong.
Right.
And it was like very much the punk, like DIY, fuck you attitude. And that was what Schreier did. That was what Obsidian did. They were like, everyone says that isometric RPGs are dead. We're going to make one and show everyone how wrong they are. And in those two cases, I mean, those games, both of them were delayed. And both of them had some issues, but they wound up turning out pretty well, and they came out and they were successful. Broken Age was pretty good. The second part was a little obscure. It got a little
got a little out there.
The puzzles got a little esoteric.
Yeah.
Pillars of Eternity was fantastic. That was one of my favorite games of this year. And actually, I wrote an article a few months ago about how Kickstarter basically saved Obsidian. Like, Obsidian would have been fucked without it, because back then they had just had a project from Microsoft canceled a game that they were working on called Stormlands. So in some ways, I mean, that's the light side of Kickstarter for
right, like the ideal,
like
the shining beacon on a hill, like that you can get an Elite Dangerous, like, or a Divinity Original Sin, like these games that are like, especially PC. I think it seems like there was a lot of PC stuff where we're coming out of that weird period where people tried to say the PC was dead, and now we're in this new golden age of PC gaming, and you've got all these people realizing there's these huge audiences for these games, and saying, all right, well, let's back it. And when it's done right, like Divinity Original Sin is like a great example of it done right. That game was amazing, like when it came out, and keeps getting better, and was like made possible by crowdfunding, but it was like a studio that was established. The whole thing really worked well, and the game came out. Obsidian, I think, was kind of a similar situation. So right, that's the good version.
Yeah, and all of those, Elite Dangerous, it's all the nostalgia thing. So nostalgia is one of those big pillars of Kickstarter. It's like, hey, you remember this type of game? Well, we're making another one, which has also led to some very, very bad things.
Right.
Because a lot of people will come on Kickstarter and be like, well, I've never made a game before, but I have this idea for an old school JRPG, and give me $60,000 to make it. And like suddenly alarm bells start going off in like the experienced Kickstarter backers' heads, being like, wait a minute, $60,000, that's like a year's salary for a programmer. That's one person's year's salary. How would they possibly make a video game on that? But that's what happens.
So I wonder, you said the experienced Kickstarter backer, which I think is becoming a thing. I do think, like, you're writing a lot, obviously, on Kotaku. You're doing a good job. Good job, Jason. You're doing a good job covering all of these Kickstarters that get kind of off in the weeds and get shady. And it does seem to me as though people who follow this stuff are now pretty aware. I see in our comments, our commenters seem very aware kind of the deal. Okay, this is what a Kickstarter is, this is what it isn't. You know, we've seen this happen enough times that it's not a huge surprise when this happens again. But then again, there are also a lot of people who back games thinking that they're gonna just get a game. I guess, do you think that people are becoming more aware of what Kickstarter is all about?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, on one hand, there are a lot more horror stories, so I would think that people would be much more skeptical now than they were a couple of years ago.
So you say a horror story, and I want to read your lead from this article that I enjoyed very much. This is about Mansion Lord, which is the $30,000 Kickstarter that vanished without a trace, apparently.
Right.
And your lead is, it's the ultimate Kickstarter horror story. You help fund a project. They succeed. They stop sending out updates. Their website expires. And nearly 2 years later, it's become clear that they've disappeared with your money. Now, first, I just wanted to say that for me, the ultimate Kickstarter horror story would be that it's like a Kickstarter for a doll, and then you pay the money for the doll, and you get the doll, and it comes, and then it turns out the doll is alive, and it starts talking to you, and then eventually it has a darker side, and it like is watching you sleep. That's my ultimate Kickstarter horror story. But this is a scary one too.
That's the ultimate Kickstarter horror book that you're going to write.
That I will write.
Terrify kids. No, well, yeah. I mean, Mansion Lord is a rare exception, and that's the $30,000 Kickstarter that we wrote about. This guy, Mike Wong, who was a game designer and didn't even put his name on the project, so we had to track him down through like DMS registration stuff and internet sleuthing. So this guy, Mike Wong, launched a Kickstarter. He said, here's this RPG, mansion, simulator, party game, whatever. Got a bunch of money, got $30,000 to make it. Suddenly stopped updating after a year, that's actually pretty rare. I mean, there are a lot of cases where the games designers will say, oh, we couldn't do this, we had to delay this, we are having issues, we have to get a publisher. There are a lot of Kickstarter issues. It's a lot more rare for someone to just straight up disappear with the money. Even some of the ones that have been canceled, like there was one from the Yogscast guys, they made a game and they raised like $500,000 and they eventually had to cancel it because they had all sorts of drama behind the scenes there. That's another article you can read on Kotaku. Even in cases like that, they will at least come out and be like, okay, guys, like, sorry, we had to cancel this. This is one of the rare cases where the guy just straight up disappeared and stopped responding. Like, I emailed him a bunch of times, hoping that he would get in touch and, like, at least say, like, oh, yeah, I couldn't do it, I got overwhelmed or whatever. But, man, it's a really, really messed up story.
Yeah, that one is wild and does feel like, when you say ultimate Kickstarter horror story, right, I mean, it is kind of the worst possible case scenario other than Murderous Doll is they just vanish entirely with your shit and you never hear from them again and they just made $30,000 apparently for nothing. So I think Unsung Story is another interesting one that that you also wrote about. That was $660,000 for a Final Fantasy Tactics spiritual successor. And that's a little more, this one seems a little more run-of-the-mill, at least in terms of Kickstarter like fuck-ups, because it just seems like the game has changed, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I backed that one, and so I have a personal investment in that. And my stance on like backing Kickstarters has kind of evolved over the years. Like at first, I was like, no, we should never back Kickstarters. Like we have to write about them. We are journalists. We should stay pure. And like that was back in 2012 when this was all starting. And then later on, I kind of softened on it, and I was like, well, I mean, it's kind of like a pre-order. You're like, it's kind of like you're buying a game or whatever. Like, and also I can cover a game more effectively if I'm getting the updates from the Kickstarter. So maybe it's not such a bad thing for me to do this. And like I saw like Broken Age and Pillars of Eternity, they had like private backer forums, and I was thinking like we could find stories in there. So I backed this one, Unsung Story, because I love Final Fantasy Tactics. It's one of my favorite games. Yes. There were a couple of warning signs. One of them was that they promised that Yasumi Matsuno, the creator of Final Fantasy Tactics, that they made it out that it was his game, and then he tweeted in Japanese like a couple weeks after the Kickstarter launch saying like, basically, some of it was lost in translation because it was in Japanese, but it was basically saying, I'm involved with the story, but this is not a Matsuno game, so I'm not the director, I'm not putting my name on this, this is not like a Matsuno project, so keep that in mind when you're backing this. And I don't know how many US backers that news got out to because it was in Japanese. I didn't even see it at the time. So that was the red flag. Another red flag was that it was by this company, Playdeck, that has a good history in making mobile games and ports of card games and stuff like that, but they never actually made an original strategy RPG. But anyway, despite all this, I was gung-ho. I love Final Fantasy Tactics. I backed it. And then they kept going radio silent. They would go months and months without updates. Like over the summer, they just stopped updating whatsoever, even though the original release date they planned was like July 2015. That's what they estimated in the Kickstarter campaign. It was really disappointing. Like they barely showed anything from the game. And then finally, a couple weeks ago, they put out this massive update saying, here's the plan, here's the development timeline. And then you look at the development timeline, and suddenly it's talking about like PvP and multiplayer, which has nothing to do with what the original campaign was promising. Like you saw that, right? Like the whole development timeline is like totally like, here's when we're going to start beta testing the PvP, and here is when we're going to launch this, and where you can play in the alpha or whatever. But anyway, so they said that they're still doing a single player campaign based on Matsuno's story, and they still want it to be like the spiritual successor to Tactics. So it could be good, I guess, but like that sudden change in focus along with the radio silence, it's all a lot of shady goings on, and I pretty much regret backing that one. I wish I hadn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so that every time we see one of these troubled Kickstarters, it makes me think in some ways this is educational. I think I've talked to game developers about this, and they've said kind of a similar idea that Kickstarters can be educational for the public because backers are getting to know the experience of sort of being a publisher, of like of what that's like, and seeing the kind of dirtier side or the uglier side of game development. I guess the more challenging side is the word I'm looking for. That, you know, games get delayed, games change in scope and focus, things don't work and get cut, the original pitch gets totally overhauled sometimes and changed. That does happen. I don't know. I guess, what do you think? I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this whole process, but what do you think about that idea that this is like a good learning experience for people?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that developers are generally being more transparent to publishers when this sort of thing happens. And also, yeah, it's interesting because we think of game publishers as like these big, bad, cold corporations that treat everyone like shit and only care about money and yada, yada. And to some extent, that's true. I mean, look at Konami. But the Konami, the pachinko maker and spa manufacturer.
Famed pachinko maker, Konami.
But yeah, to some extent that's true. But to another extent, it's like, oh, this is how developers, like, this is what game development's really like. It's super messy and like complicated, and all this shit is happening. The publishers have to deal with.
I remember people joking, and this is, you know, I like Tim Schafer a lot, but there was a good joke about how he's always delaying games, and he was always delaying games when he was working with publishers, and he's been very, you know, he's talked quite a bit about his sort of tense relationship with some publishers, and people saying, okay, so this is how it feels to publish Tim Schafer, like when he kept delaying Broken Age, and, you know, then they had to cut it into two, and which I thought was kind of good. The problem with that, though, is that publishers have a lot of power and recourse in that relationship. They can. And Kickstarter backers don't really have any recourse except to complain on forums. So you see people saying, I want my money back, but, you know, they're not publishers. They don't have a legal team. They're not Activision or EA. They can't stand up for themselves in that way, which sucks.
I mean, yeah, the one thing they can do is come to us, and one of our, like, Kickstarter has made our jobs much more important in that we can be the watchdogs there and call out these Kickstarters when they're doing terrible things and, like, not delivering on what they promised. And so, which is a good way to say, readers, listeners, if you know of a Kickstarter that has problems, email us at any time, tips@kotaku.com. You can reach us.
I also think, and I mean, we can do that. It's also good. I do think, like you said earlier, that people are starting to understand what a Kickstarter is and what it isn't a little better. That it is a kind of like a pre-order, but it's not a guarantee, and that you're getting yourself a copy of the game and you're getting to be kind of on the inside, but also that could just mean that you're on the inside of something that just kind of falls apart. Yeah. And it's not something you can't get a refund. It's not a pre-order. So, and I think the more we tell people that and the more people understand that, the more they'll go into Kickstarter with their eyes open, kind of understanding what they're getting into.
So the big question is, when should you donate to a Kickstarter?
Yes, and I have a couple we're going to answer that. Okay.
Yeah, well, so I'll give you a couple answers, and then you can give us a couple answers. I have two thoughts. One is you should look to see if they're experienced developers, like if it's a bunch of people who seem to be like, oh, I love JRPGs and I just wanted to share my passion. That's probably a bad. It's probably a red flag that you should watch out for. If it's someone who's like, oh yeah, I've spent the past 10 years being a designer at BioWare and EA and whatever, and also here's the producer who has been a project manager for 10 years and he knows how to hit deadlines and maintain budgets, et cetera, that's a lot more trustworthy, and you should be more inclined to trust them in general. Not always, of course. I mean, even the most experienced veterans in the world can still backstab you and not deliver, but that's a helpful sign. And the second thing is if they're realistic about their goals. Like if any game Kickstarter that's like under like $200,000 probably is never going to happen, because you got to think like it's going to take at least a year to make a video game. Let's say it's a small scale project, a 2D game, low budget, whatever. At least $200,000, because you need to pay at least like the designer, an artist, programmer, producer, any marketing they may want to put in, which might be minuscule, but and there are a lot of like technology, computers, other licensing costs, console. You have to pay extra money to get your game on consoles. There are a lot of factors here that you have to think about, and even if it's just one guy saying, I'm going to do this all myself, you have to think realistically, like, can this game really happen with that amount?
Yeah, I think, I mean, those are two good ones. Those are the main ones that I use. I think the realistic goals thing is really big for me, just where, in general, I like Kickstarter projects that feel self-contained. And there are a lot of times I'll look at a video game Kickstarter and there are just those immediate red flags, like procedurally generated open world and just, you know, a cast of hundreds of characters, each with their own unique storylines. You'll see stuff like that, and that's always where I say, no, you're not, there's no way, you're definitely not doing that. So when someone says something like, I don't know, like a game like Card Hunter or some really focused, it's going to be exactly this small scale thing that's a really cool idea, and that's what we're going to do. And then maybe they have some stretch goals or something. But you can almost always tell looking at the scope of the game whether it's something that a person has like fully conceptualized or whether they're just pitching their dream game. And you know, there's such a huge difference between those two in terms of how realistic they are. That's usually what I go with. But those, you know, pedigree, all of that stuff is good, I think, to keep in mind.
Yeah, and you should always really consider that it's a risk, and it's always going to be a risk. And just be prepared to lose that money, because we all know it might happen.
Right. It's like if you get a game, it's just a nice bonus at the end.
So, Kirk, there's another game that we've both been playing recently that is most certainly not on Kickstarter.
It was a Kickstarter success story. It was crowdfunded by hundreds of gamers around the world. Crowdfunded
by hundreds of executives at Sony. A little game called Uncharted. Kirk, you and I both been playing the Uncharted collection. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think it's very interesting to play it now. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't played. I really like all the Uncharted games. So we're talking about this is the PS4 collection, remastered by Blue Point for PS4 from the PS3 games, done up into like 60 frames per second, or targeting that, I guess. So they look nicer and sharper, and you can kind of play all of them. I haven't played all of them all the way through. I don't know if I have time, but I played some of the first one, some of the second one, and more of the third one, which I think we're both playing the third one again, sort of. I think they're interesting. I mean, there was a while where Uncharted 2 was one of my favorite games in a way. I really liked how good it was at everything that it did. So it's cool coming back to it. I mean, I've played through that game several times, and playing it again and just seeing it again has been cool. I don't know. What are you thinking?
Well, so you played them all on PS3, right? Like as they came out? Did you play the first one like as soon as it came out?
I didn't play them as they came out, actually. I got a PS3 shortly after Uncharted 2 came out. That was like the game, that and Journey, I think, were the two games that convinced me to get a PS3. So then I went back, and I think I played Uncharted 2, and then I went back and played Uncharted 1, and then I played 3 as it came out.
Okay, so my history, just to give us some context here, is I actually didn't play them until last year. Last summer, I played Uncharted 2 for the first time. I hadn't played and then I still haven't played 1, and then I just started 3 on the PS4. So I'm experiencing 3 for the first time now.
Nice. You can experience the disappointment along with everybody else.
I don't know, man. Well, so first of all, I thought Uncharted 2 was great until it got all supernatural at the end. And the end really sucked. Yeah. Like having to deal with those big beasts, supernatural beasts. That was the game.
And how about that final boss fight where you run away from the guy and blow up bombs next to him?
That sucked. That really sucked. But it was a fantastic game other than that. And like I loved the writing and the way it was so cinematic, and like how it felt like an Indiana Jones movie, like encapsulated as a game. It was really, really well done and great. And then I bought 3 on PS3. I was excited to play it, just never got around to it. And then I heard they were making the remaster, so I figured I would just wait. And now I just started 3, and so far I think it's fantastic, man. I just got up to Syria, so I just finished the part in France where you go through and you shoot everybody and like.
That part in the Uncharted game where you go through and shoot everybody.
That part where Nathan Drake murders people. You go through and you like solve that puzzle, and I thought I like the way you interact with the notebook to solve the puzzles and like have to figure it out. I thought that was really cool. And then they set the building on fire, and you're just weaving through with Sully, and they're doing all these crazy acrobatic things, and it's like so ridiculous and over the top. But I love that about it. I love that it can be so over the top and fun, and it's just like not afraid to be like, yeah, Nathan Drake's gonna make this like 50-foot jump because he's fucking Nathan Drake and he's Indiana Jones.
I feel sometimes like it's interesting because I've most recently played The Last of Us a whole bunch of times, which is a very different kind of game, and how I really hope, I don't want to talk about Uncharted 4 too much because we don't know anything about that game, but I hope that game sticks with the thing you're talking about, like that Nathan Drake is this ridiculous, like almost cartoon character, because Joel is like such a lumbering old man who falls down all the time and like can't do anything, and that's fine for that game, and it works really well, and it makes that actually, for me, the systems of that game much more generally enjoyable because the stealth and all that. But But yeah, there's something about the way that Nathan Drake is constantly doing ridiculous shit, and like one of the things about Uncharted 3 that didn't quite work for me when I played it originally was how the story is kind of has this theme of them returning to the idea of Nathan Drake as having a death wish and like being getting everyone, you know, not caring that everyone around him is in danger all the time because he's constantly flirting with death. But it doesn't quite, which doesn't work for me thematically because the game is so obviously like he's so ridiculously good at staying alive and he never, you know, he can just do the most amazing shit. So it's hard for me to take it seriously when they then ask me to kind of question that. But, you know, so playing Uncharted 3 again for me has also been interesting. I think I'm going to be much more easy on it now than I was. We'll see. Some of those later combat sections are pretty fucking annoying, but
there's too much shooting, way too much shooting.
Well, and which is interesting that you say, because at the beginning, what I really noticed was playing the beginning again is there's no shooting for a really long time in the beginning of that game.
Right, and then it starts the shooting.
Right, and then the shooting starts, and you're like, oh yeah, right, this is Uncharted. Like, it's like right when it starts, too. Suddenly there's just waves of dudes coming at you, and you're just shooting them.
And it's bad. It doesn't, like, you shoot someone in the head, and it doesn't really feel like you got a headshot. It just kind of feels like you're shooting.
Well, it's not like Destiny. It doesn't, like, explode with light.
It doesn't have that, like, tactile feel where, and all the enemies feel, like, rubbery, and it's, like, there's a weird feel to the shooting that I really don't like.
Well, so the rubbery thing is interesting. And now, we were texting about this a little bit over the weekend. This is something that I've been grappling with this game a little bit, is that because it runs at 60 frames a second, I actually think it's kind of weird looking. And I don't think I'm going to be alone in this. It's not bad, and there are parts, like the shooting in particular handles much better at 60 frames per second in that usual way, like just because you have better response to what's happening on screen. But when you're platforming in this game, you know, Uncharted games do this weird magnetized thing. It's sort of, I don't love it. I mean, it's very controversial because it sort of removes the gameplay sometimes. You're almost, like I remember in the Vita version, you could do touch controls and you would just trace a line over where you were going and Drake would like move like, because that's how, and it was the same platforming engine, I think. Like it was just, okay, draw a line.
He's just very sticky. He just sticks to things.
Yeah, he's very sticky. And you'll notice that like you'll jump a distance and the animation kind of pulls him back in the air almost and then forward, and he like skips in a weird way and then sticks to the wall. So there's these kind of like things that you notice more at 60 frames per second where his body like elongates almost, like he's like a rubber band man jumping around. And it's just a little uncanny kind of. And I think that at 30, I think this was optimized to run at 30. And that it just, they do this thing with their animation engine. I remember actually reading about it once where they flip between two different types of animation depending on the type of action. And I think you just are seeing that happen at 60 frames per second in real time, and it's kind of jarring. I don't know if I think you were saying you noticed it too.
It's interesting. Yeah, I did feel like a little bit nauseous after moving too much camera moving, and like I think that had to do with the frame rate, which was weird. It's like the opposite of Metal Gear Solid, which is made a better game because of the frame rate. Like the frame rate makes everything, and it's like clearly designed to be played at 60 frames per second. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting technical question.
It's a thing I think we'll wrestle with in some types of video games, because I'm very leery of the argument that 30 FPS is better for some games, but I actually also. Like, the cutscenes can look kind of weird because the animation is so good and the facial animation is so crisp. It almost looks like you're watching that soap opera thing with, like, real people, and it's, like, uncanny, where if it's at 30... Like, The Last of Us on PS4, I turned down to 30. Because it
really?
Yeah, because I can't really get that emotionally invested when I'm watching Ellie cry, and it just looks like a kind of doll moving around, because it looks so real, and I'm like, this is like doesn't look right. Like, we're at 30, it looks like a Pixar movie or something. It looks
right.
So,
yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, a thing I've noticed.
Well, so everything else looks, everything looks fantastic, obviously. These are like fantastic looking games and everything is exploding, and like you see this, and then they're just like visual like treats, which is awesome. Which is like, if you're into that type of game, like they're very watchable and very like enjoyable to see happen. Some of the camera angles are really fascinating. They reminded me of Final Fantasy VII of all games, where the camera will just move to really interesting places. And not a lot of games do that with camera work.
It's funny, they started doing that in 3 too. If I noticed this, there's a
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 3.
Yeah, a really noticeable progression, which is interesting. In 1, the opening cutscene of 1 is really flat and boring, and it's a kind of bad intro, and just the camera just sits there. And then the camera's just right behind Drake. Where and then in 2 they definitely get more creative immediately, and then 3 is it's like fixed camera points, and like it'll cut to over the top, and then we're walking and they're walking toward the camera, and like it's like constantly like over the shoulder, and then it's like handheld camera, and they're really getting purposefully cinematic about it, which is really interesting.
It's really well done. It's funny, a lot of people, so here's my chance to get in a pedantic little bit of nitpicking here. So a lot of people describe the Uncharted games as bombastic, and they use the word bombastic to describe games like this in like Michael Bay movies, and they don't realize that they're using the word bombastic incorrectly.
Okay.
Because the word bombastic has nothing to do with like bombs and flashes. Like you would think of the word bombastic as like, that means that this is a very explosive game or a movie or
this
whatever.
This is now, in full disclosure, this is what I think the word means right now.
Right. A lot of people do.
Know.
The word bombastic means that it refers to someone using words that are like highfalutin, like SAT words basically, to make a speech or like some sort of language appear more high intellect than it is. So like if I use crazy like words like verisimilitude, like words like that.
Yeah.
That's like bombastic. Like, hey, the
word.
Politician is speaking in a bombastic way. That's what the word means.
Got it.
It's somehow become co-opted to mean things explode, which I find annoying because every time I see someone use the word bombastic, I'm like, no, that's not what the word bombastic means.
Okay, all right. Well, hopefully everybody listening to this now knows and will use the word properly.
I hope so.
A small step forward for using the right words for things.
So Kirk, I have a question for you.
What word you would use for Uncharted then, if not bombastic?
You'd use the word explosive or like flashy or, I don't know, over the top. Yeah, those are words that I think people mean to say when they say bombastic. So, okay, Kirk, I have an important question for you.
Okay.
Is Nathan Drake secretly like 400 pounds? Because everything he jumps on just collapses immediately.
It's really funny how that has become such a thing. It's playing the first Uncharted, there's a whole section really near the beginning where you're doing that. And I keep thinking about this as like, this is the first time that Naughty Dog did this. And maybe they did it in an earlier game, but you're like, oh man, he's going across these platforms and he jumps on, it's like, oh crap, and it like starts breaking and he jumps and then
No.
No. And like in the first one doing that through this whole section, and it's this like circular drainage like thing that you're going down and they're all falling. And I was like, man, this is just, get used to it, buddy. You're going to be doing this constantly. And then, of course, Uncharted 2 begins. It's the same thing where you're on the train and everything you touch like falls off the train as you're climbing toward the top. And and then even in Uncharted 3, I think, because you play as him as a kid, and there's a section, you're up on the rooftops and you do the same thing and you jump on like a storm drain and then it pulls out from the wall and then you have to do the swinging jump. And it's like, well, kid, you're learning now.
Yep. Everything just collapses. It's like. Yep. It's such a funny cliche that they use that I guess some movies use it. But every time I think.
I feel like Uncharted maybe even created that cliche. I think that was the first time in a Tomb Raider style game they did the thing where.
No, Tomb Raider did it. Tomb Raider has definitely done it before. Yeah, it's definitely been a thing. Like I think even Indiana Jones did that sort of thing.
Yeah, the destructible environment thing. It feels like they did it a little more cinematically maybe in Uncharted.
Yeah.
But,
so I mean, I guess the question people are probably going to have is this Uncharted collection worth their time and money and whatnot?
I think if you really love Uncharted, I think it'll probably be on sale pretty soon. It doesn't seem like it's the kind of like the thing that you need to pre-order. Like it's a reissue of an old game. Like so, it's cool. I'm definitely having fun playing through it again.
Yeah, I bet it'll be on sale for Black Friday.
It seems like they're going to
till November.
But yeah, like especially if you're a fan or you're a collector, you want to have that in your library. It's a cool version of it.
Yeah, or you haven't played them before. Cool.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I guess I'm trying to think of a good segue here. Well, so Uncharted is an action adventure where you jump on things and they collapse.
Right.
What we're about to talk about next is an action adventure shooter where you jump on things and try to avoid getting hit by pistons because you're raiding in Destiny.
And you're trying to find the secret hidden room in the raid, apparently.
Was that it? Was that a good enough segue? Was that
I think that worked. I think you got to Destiny, which is the important thing. So we're going to talk about Destiny now.
Kirk, we never talk about Destiny.
It's funny that we have done, we had an entire podcast about Destiny. But our first podcast, we didn't talk about Destiny.
I'm sure we mentioned Destiny.
Well, I think maybe we made a joke about how we weren't talking about it.
So to those of you readers who are not familiar, Kirk and I are both Destiny fiends. We've been playing pretty obsessively for the past year or so. And now, finally, we are not only fiends, but can tell people, hey, this is actually a great game now, and it's worth your time. One of those reasons, well, the biggest reason is Taken King. One of those reasons is the thing we want to spend some time talking about, which is the raid in the Taken King, which is truly excellent and one of the best video game experiences that we have had. Kirk, what's your favorite part of the new raid?
Man, that's a tough call. I would say either the Oryx fight at the very end, which is a really, really cool battle, or there's a platforming. So there's the platforming section early on where you're jumping from ship to ship. You have to go through this weird shipyard. It's basically the Destiny equivalent of a TIE fighter factory. And you have to jump from tomb ship to tomb ship through this hilarious jumping puzzle that just cracks me up on a number of different levels. So I'd say that, and then the final battle, which is really something else.
Yeah,
those are my two favorites.
I guess we should warn people that we are going to spoil the raid here. So
yeah, we're going to talk about specifics.
Yeah, it's been 2.5 weeks since it came out, so I feel like that's the statute of limitations have passed.
But if you haven't done it yet and you want to go in and you're still managing to go in fresh, which is a great way to go if you can manage it.
We did it fresh.
With a team that don't know what they're doing. We did it fresh and it was awesome. So if you can do that, skip this part, but I'm guessing most people won't care.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, the biggest appeal I think of the raid is going in there for the first time and trying to figure and seeing all these weird things like, hey, there's a relic here. Hey, there's a pool of light on the floor here. What should we do? How the hell do we do this? And that was brilliant. That was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, so the Golgoroth fight, so there are 9 distinct sections of this raid, I believe, as I counted. 9, which counting, the very beginning, opening the door to get in, through to the end.
So it's opening the door, it's the tomb ships.
Yeah, opening the door, the tomb ships, the relay race, the War Priest fight, the maze. Before Golgoroth, Golgoroth, the Mario platforming section, the Death Singers, and Oryx.
Gotcha.
You could kind of count that one room where you have to jump up, but that's
that's barely. That's not. That's barely.
Okay.
Wow.
So 9. Yeah, it's big. It's so that's actually, I think, mathematically the size, almost maybe 1 or 2 removed from a combination of Vault of Glass and Crota's End. So it's big. I think that when we did it, it took us 5 get-togethers to beat the whole thing. My favorite time was when we beat Golgoroth, which is the second boss, because that encounter, which is, you've got this big dude in the middle, and then you've got to capture his gaze, and then people are jumping into the pit and dealing with ads on the floor and shooting him, and then 2 people are up top. That fight, for us figuring it out, was an amazing process. We had to break the whole thing down to its component parts and say, okay, well, when we do this, these guys come out, but when these guys are gone, they don't come out, and when we shoot him, this happens, and I don't know, that was so cool for me.
Yeah, well, so I remember Todd, our buddy, our Destiny buddy, who we play Trials of Osiris with a lot, he figured out that when you stop drawing his gaze, when it says fails to draw Golgoroth's gaze, the ads stop. And that was really the key that made us able to figure out the whole encounter.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, everything about the raid is just super cool. It's really well done. There are 4 bosses, which is crazy because even the Vault of Glass has, 2 bosses? A Templar and then Atheon?
Yeah.
And yeah, the tomb ship part is really cool. We still forget that. I still forget exactly which way to go even after having done it a few times. And then Oryx. Man, Oryx.
Yeah, it's a fight. It's a hell of a fight. I've done it. So I've beaten Oryx several times now. I've done it with a couple groups that you and I have been in, which has been cool. We've always had new people, which is always exciting when you're doing it with new people. I did it once with a group of people who all knew what to do. And it was really cool because everyone just knew their role. And I could start to see, okay, this is how this raid is going to be pretty soon, where we're just running it to get stuff and we've kind of got it down. And what's cool about that fight, really, it's like a lot of the fights in the raid is once you know what to do and everyone's executing their role correctly, it's not that hard. It's actually not that bad. If everybody, if you can bring down your ogre, if you can kind of carry your weight, which everyone really needs to do, it works. And that's kind of what I like about this raid is compared to Crota's End, where you could 2-man so many things and it wasn't entirely designed for 6 people, even though you could play with 6 people. These fights really are. You can maybe 5-man them. I'm sure there will be people who figure out a way to 3-man it, but you know, the Oryx fight in particular is a full team undertaking.
Well, isn't it set up so you can't even open the doors without like having 6 people?
Oh, that's true. That's right. We were noticing that, where you have to have a full team. I wonder if it's a full fire team or if it's really 6 and you just can't.
No, it wasn't.
Go without
It
6.
was 6 because Billy, who we were playing with, he went to tower. So we had our fire team of 5, and we were standing in front of the door.
And it wouldn't open.
And it wouldn't open. So it really does require 6, which is
Yeah.
cool because Bungie was like, okay, people are soloing those other raids. Let's see them try to solo this.
Well, and and also it's just design. I mean, you literally, if you can't solo those doors, but you also, I mean, War Priest, right? Like you just can't do that with jumping. You can't. You have to have at least 3 people activating the platforms. And, you know, Golgoroth you could do, because there is that strategy that we found where you can all go into one pool of light. You could do that with fewer people. But, you know, a lot of other, it's very cool how it's been designed.
For all of the encounters are designed so that you have to be able to do a certain amount of damage in a certain amount of time. The War Priest, Golgoroth, the Death Singers, Oryx, all 4 of them, you have to be able to, like, kill things and like do a certain amount of damage within the time limit, which is really cool because it's like, I mean, it sucks if you're playing the game casually and you don't have time to get good enough gear, but it's cool that they reward players who are more efficient and more successful than others, which is...
Yeah, well, and like, so, and I just did the raid for the first time with Touch of Malice, which is that really crazy gun that you get for doing, you know, kind of the most outlandish collection quest in the game. And once you find all these things and complete all these steps, you get this crazy gun that's the weirdest gun I've ever seen in Destiny that like is a full auto scout rifle that has a really small clip, and when you get to the bottom bullet just keeps replenishing and it takes your health each time. So like, and those bullets do more damage. So most of the time it's like a very weird limited application gun, but then when you're fighting the bosses, you're standing in this aura, suddenly you're impervious to damage. So you just sit there and like hold down the trigger and do an amazing amount of damage. And we were doing, I mean, it made the whole raid way easier. It was very cool that you get this gun in part for doing the raid, and then that makes the raid much easier, which I would imagine when hard mode comes out, or whatever that looks like, it's going to be very beneficial to have this weird gun that then makes this fight easier. And it's cool how that all fits together.
So speaking of hard mode, over the weekend, players discovered a secret room in the Super Mario Brothers platforming section of the raid, where if you hit the switches, there are like switches all around with light spikes on them, and if you hit them in a certain order, you can unlock this room across the gap. And when you get there, there's like a relic and a statue and some runes, and nobody's really figured out what to do yet. My theory is that that's going to be an optional boss in the hard mode version of the raid.
I think that'll be, I read your theory this morning and over my coffee, and I thought that sounds right. Like, I think a lot of the stuff that people are finding, like that paradox, the thing hidden in the paradox mission felt similar, where they're finding stuff that's gonna be a little easier to find when you're actually supposed to find it. Because I mean, maybe not, but that's a crazy, like the way they're fighting that thing is crazy.
Very esoteric.
And like crazier, I think, than Destiny. Like the Taken King has hidden a lot of secrets. So, you know, like in the Black Spindle challenge, which I think is the biggest secret that people have found so far, that was pretty obvious. Like when that happened, you walked into the room, the door opened. It wasn't this insane hidden thing that people had to trigger in a really crazy way. So I think your theory holds water anyways, that this is going to be a little bit more obvious when people actually find it, and it's maybe not supposed to be found yet, but it'll be interesting to see what it is. I like that there are secrets in Destiny now.
Yeah, I mean, and also the thing that I mentioned in my post this week is that one of the armor pieces you get has a buff that's like gives you armor when you're holding the King's Fall relic, and that hasn't been relevant at all. So I assume that'll be relevant either in a hard mode version of one of the bosses or something else. And I love the idea of them adding a secret optional boss that you don't actually have to fight. So I'm hung up on that theory.
Yeah, well, and I hope that hard mode has that kind of thing in it. Just based on like what Luke Smith, the director of the game, said when we interviewed him, it sounds like they're not going to do what we're assuming, which is just no revives and harder enemies, which is great because like that's fine, I guess. But like, you know, I want a weirder, really different experience. And if there's stuff like that, like you have to carry a relic through the whole raid, like that would be amazing if that were the thing.
That would be so cool. Or or like, you have to carry a relic to the secret room in order to activate the boss, or like you have to carry the relic in order to kill the boss. I don't know. I'm sure it'll be interesting. So We should get to the next section, which is reader questions.
All right.
We have a pretty good reader question today from Kotaku reader Joey O'Connell. Joey asks, or Joey says, sorry, he didn't ask a question. He demanded that we do something.
This is just a statement.
Hey guys.
People can send statements to our email too. It's allowed.
Hey guys, pick 3 must-play JRPGs that are pre-PS2/GameCube. I haven't played many games before then, and I want to check out the essentials. 3 must-play JRPGs before the GameCube era. So that would be Nintendo, Super Nintendo, PS1, Genesis, not PS2. Am I missing any? I guess Sega Saturn. Does that count?
Yeah, I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that you have a lot of recommendations.
Well, I want you to go first, because I don't want to overlap with you.
Okay. Well, I would say, so you're more of a JRPG expert than I am. I'm always kind of playing catch-up. I won't recommend the games that I haven't finished that you've told me to play, because I know you'll probably say those, and I don't want to just be recommending things that I haven't finished.
Okay.
But of the games from that era that I've played that I really like, I would recommend Final Fantasy VII. I know that is sort of a
obvious.
Yeah, obvious, and sort of people will say whatever, like it's not as good as the other ones. I still think it's really, really good.
Well, it's seminal. I think
fun.
Everyone should have played that game because it's so important.
Yeah, I would also say Final Fantasy Tactics is a very really cool one because the actual game design of that is so good.
Can they just play Unsung Story?
Yeah, apparently they like the PvP version of that.
Yeah, the PvP version.
And I would say Chrono Trigger as well, which I know you've been replaying. That game I played on DS, the DS version of that, which is I think it was on Super Nintendo, right? So it's
we should say the optimal ways to play all 3 of those.
Yeah,
games.
so that game in particular is great.
Okay, so Chrono Trigger on DS. Tactics. I actually really like the phone version, but
I like it I played it on Vita, and it was
Vita.
Good.
It's good. It's the PSP version that you can get on your Vita. But the phone version actually runs pretty well if you don't mind, if you like commute a lot with your phone and you want to have it easily. The touch controls are actually pretty damn good. And then 7.
Vita, I would say now.
Vita.
I played that on a PS3 at the time on my TV, but it's nice. I've been replaying it a little bit off and on my Vita, and that's a good way to do it. So I would say those 3.
Or PC. 7 has a pretty good PC version too.
That's true.
Okay, good choices. So I guess I have to get a little more obscure. First of all, there's the obvious one, Suikoden 2, which is the greatest game ever made, and nothing will ever surpass it in history. Which you can get that on PSN for PS3 or Vita.
So maybe consider trying that, maybe. If you're the idea of the greatest game ever made will never be surpassed by anything.
If you like video games, if you're a human being, you should probably play that. You can check out, we have a couple of Kotaku articles about how the best way to play it and tips and why you should play it, et cetera, et cetera. I won't get too redundant. What else? Some seminal stuff. Well, I think I'll avoid doing a Final Fantasy because you picked 2 Final Fantasies, even though there are some other seminal Final Fantasies that you must play. I will say, I'm going to pick 1 on PS1 and 1 on Super Nintendo. On PS1, I think a game that you must play is Xenogears because it is a sprawling, epic, fantastic story that has a couple of issues with pacing and the text speed is really slow. But you should play that. I think you can download the PS1 version and play it on your Vita. Or the best way to play it is actually buy a copy so you don't have to feel guilty, and then download it on an emulator so you can play with the fast forward button so you can skip the slow, because the text speed is so slow that it's like unbearable. But if you can hold the fast forward button and get through the text really fast, it's way, way better, especially if you read quickly. So my recommendation is that, but do not pirate it without buying it first. So this is important. Buy it and then.
This is important. Ethical JRPG playing.
Ethical JRPG playing.
Then pirate it.
I try to never. I don't have a problem with downloading games, but I always try, especially stuff you can't even get, like Mother 3. But I always try to buy stuff if I'm going to download it, also because it just feels right. With older games, I mean, I wouldn't download, I wouldn't pirate new games or anything like that. And then Super Nintendo recommendation, I'm going to go with Lufia 2, which is something that a lot of people haven't heard of. It's a kind of puzzle JRPG. It's like a mix. It's sort of like a mix between Zelda and like a classic Final Fantasy. The combat is all turn-based, but there are dungeons that have different puzzles, and like you get various objects like an bombs and a bow and arrow and a hook shot, and you can use them in the environment. And a lot of the puzzles are really good, and like they're almost better than Zelda games of that era. So that is a solid JRPG recommendation for everyone.
Yeah, that's like 500 hours of games or something.
a lot of game time.
I think our reader is going to have his work cut out for him.
So just a reminder, if you want to submit questions for the podcast, you can email splitscreen@kotaku.com. And Kirk, that is just about it for today. Any final words of wisdom you want to share with the readers before we sign off?
Boy, I don't know.
Always eat your vegetables.
Yeah, eggs are good for lunch.
Eggs are solid.
Generally speaking,
I like eggs and avocado.
Going. Yeah, eggs and avocado go very well together. I think those are my words of wisdom. Words of wisdom.
Eggs and avocado. Eat your vegetables. Don't back Kickstarters unless you are prepared to lose that money.
Yeah, I think that about
wraps it up. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Cool. Thanks.
Bye, guys.